Poor girl found men in suits surrounding her mother's grave. The feared Mafia boss was paying. Seraphine clutched the edges of her worn shawl, pulling it closer around her shoulders as she walked along the cracked stone paths. Her mother's grave lay at the far end, past rows of weathered tombstones and moss-covered statues, their silent faces seeming to watch her with quiet judgment. She hadn't been here in months, not since her mother passed. Each step toward the grave felt heavier than the last, weighted with memories she wasn't sure she wanted to face. When she finally reached the small clearing where her mother rested, she froze. Men in dark suits surrounded the grave, standing with stiff, silent precision. Their faces were shadowed, expressionless, but their presence radiated danger. It was a scene she had only ever imagined in nightmares, the kind of gathering she thought existed only in whispered stories of men who controlled worlds from behind velvet curtains. At the center of them stood a man. He was tall, his posture perfectly straight, and there was something in the way he moved that made the shadows themselves seem to bend around him. Seraphine's heart skipped a beat, a mixture of fear and curiosity twisting inside her. She had heard the name whispered in the darkest corners of the city, Lucian, the man everyone feared, the one whose power reached places even the law dared not touch. Yet seeing him here at her mother's grave, she felt something strange, something that wasn't fear, though fear clung to the edges of her thoughts. Who are you?" she whispered, stepping closer, her voice trembling more from nerves than the cold. Lucian's head tilted slightly, as if he had been expecting her all along. His eyes were dark, sharp, but there was a softness in them, a shadow of grief she hadn't expected. "Seraphine," he said, his voice low, smooth, and oddly melodic. "I knew your mother. She was important to me once." Her hand froze over the cold stone of her mother's grave. Important. How could she not have known? The men in suits shifted slightly, a silent acknowledgement of his words, but none spoke. Only the wind answered, whistling through the trees like the sigh of a mourning spirit. Why are you here?" she asked, her voice gaining a little strength. Her mother's death had left a hollow ache in her chest, but she was not used to being treated like a child. "What do you want from me?" Lucian took a step closer, his presence overwhelming but not threatening, not yet. "I came to pay my respects," he said simply. There was an odd honesty in his tone that made her pause, and to honor a promise. She frowned, unsure what to make of him. A promise to her mother. Her gaze drifted to the black suit that shimmered slightly in the dim light. There was an air about him, a gravity that made the air itself feel heavier. She wanted to run, to escape from the weight of this man and his silent attendants, but her feet felt rooted to the ground, as if the earth itself held her there. "You don't have to be afraid," Lucian said, almost as if reading her mind. "I am not here to hurt you." Seraphine's lips pressed into a thin line. She did not trust easily, especially not strangers who seemed to wield the world in their hands. Yet, there was something in the way he looked at her, like he saw her in a way no one else ever had, that made her hesitate. For a long silence, neither spoke. Only the wind and the soft rustling of leaves carried sound through the clearing. The men in suits remained motionless, their dark forms like shadows tethered to the ground. Then, Lucian bent slightly and placed something on the grave. It was a black rose. Its petals glimmered with dew, almost unnaturally perfect in shape and color. Seraphine's fingers twitched, an inexplicable longing pulling her toward it. She reached out, hesitated, and finally touched the rose. The fragrance was subtle, haunting, like memories she had never known, yet somehow belonged to her. "This belonged to your mother," Lucian said quietly, "and to me once. She asked me to watch over you in my own way." Seraphine's heart twisted. She had always imagined that her mother's life, though ordinary in appearance, had been filled with secrets, hints of sadness she could never fully understand. But this presence, this gesture, was a revelation that made her pulse quicken. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why come here now after everything?" Lucian's gaze dropped to the ground, a shadow of sorrow passing over his sharp features. Because the world is changing, and there are things you do not yet understand. What things? She pressed, though fear and curiosity warred within her. He straightened slowly, his eyes lifting to hers, intense and unflinching. There are forces, old and unforgiving, forces tied to your bloodline, to your mother. You must be prepared. Seraphine's chest tightened. The words were strange, almost mythical, and yet they carried a weight she could not ignore. She wanted to ask him more, to demand answers, but her voice caught. The cold air stung her lungs, and the presence of the men in suits made her uneasy. Yet she could not leave, not yet. You do not have to trust me, Lucian said softly, but you must listen. The moment to act will come, and when it does, you cannot be unprepared. Seraphine swallowed hard. She did not know whether to be frightened or intrigued. Everything about this man was dangerous, yet every word, every gesture, hinted at a story she could not yet grasp. A sudden gust of wind rattled the trees, and the black rose trembled in her hand. Lucian's eyes flicked toward the horizon, sharp and alert. "You are not alone," he said. "There are those who watch, who wait, but some wait with malice and some with purpose." She looked up at him, confusion and awe swirling inside her. "Purpose?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, yet not close enough to touch. "Yes," he said. "Your mother, she left a path for you, one you must follow, whether you are ready or not." Seraphine's hand tightened around the rose. Her mind raced with questions. Why had her mother kept secrets? Why now? And why this man, feared by all standing here, offering guidance, warning, and something more she could not name? The silence stretched between them, long and filled with unspoken thoughts. Then, as if summoned by the tension in the air, one of the men in suits stepped forward. He handed Lucian a folded piece of paper, which he glanced at briefly before tucking into his coat. His eyes returned to Seraphine, steady and unyielding. "Your journey begins soon," he said. "I cannot walk it for you, but I can guide you through the first steps." Seraphine felt a shiver run down her spine, not entirely from the cold. She had lived a life of ordinary struggles, of quiet grief, of loneliness, and yet here was a man, a legend, a shadow of the world's fear, telling her that her life was about to change in ways she could not imagine. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely steady. Lucian's lips curved in a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Because you are stronger than you know, and because your mother believed you could be." The words struck her like a melody, sad and beautiful. She wanted to run, to flee from this strange and dangerous reality, yet her feet remained planted, as if bound by the roots of the earth itself. For a moment they stood together, separated by a few steps, but connected by a tension neither could fully explain. The black rose in her hand trembled slightly, a symbol of grief, mystery, and the first flicker of something unspoken between them. Then, without warning, Lucian stepped back, his eyes darkening. "Be careful," he said. "The night is long, and shadows move faster than the eye can see." Seraphine felt a pang of fear, a premonition that her world had already begun to change, that her mother's secrets were only the beginning, and that this man, both terrifying and magnetic, would play a role far deeper than she could yet understand. She watched as he turned, the men in suits forming a protective line behind him. Their presence was like a wall of darkness, silent but powerful. Lucian's figure disappeared slowly into the mist, leaving her alone with the black rose in her hand, the cold stone of her mother's grave beneath her fingers, and the first flutter of a destiny she could not yet name. As the wind swept through the graveyard, whispering secrets from long ago, Seraphine pressed the rose to her chest, feeling a connection to her mother, to the mysterious man who had come to honor her, and to the shadows that now seemed to linger around her life. She knew deep in her bones that nothing would ever be the same again, and somewhere in the distance, a voice echoed through the mist, low and compelling, calling her name. The city at night was a different world. Lights flickered across the river, reflecting like scattered stars on the water, and the distant hum of life whispered from narrow alleyways. Seraphine walked cautiously, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, but her mind was heavy with the memory of the graveyard. The black rose she still carried felt like a living thing, pressing warmth and warning into her palm. Every step felt like the beginning of something she could neither predict nor control. Lucian's words replayed in her mind. "You are stronger than you know. Your journey begins soon." Strength, a word that had once felt distant, almost unattainable. She had survived loss, loneliness, and fear, but now, with the weight of secrets pressing down on her, she felt exposed, fragile, and yet drawn. That night a soft knock disturbed her thoughts. She turned sharply, the rose trembling slightly in her hand. At the door stood a figure she could have recognized anywhere. Lucian. "You should not be alone," he said, his voice low and calm, yet carrying an intensity that made her heart race. I don't understand," Seraphine stammered. "Why are you here? Why now?" He stepped inside without waiting for an answer, his presence filling the small room with a gravity that made the air itself heavy. "Because danger follows knowledge and knowledge follows bloodlines," he said. "Your mother, she left you pieces of truth. Pieces that some would kill to possess." Seraphine's fingers tightened around the rose. Her mother's death had been sudden, wrapped in mystery and whispered rumors. Yet here was a man, a legend of fear and power, telling her that her mother's life had secrets that threatened her even now. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice barely steady. She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept his guidance, but trust was a fragile thing, easily broken. Lucian's gaze softened just for a moment. "You do not have to trust me, not yet, but you will have to follow me if you want answers." Her curiosity, fierce and unavoidable, outweighed her fear. She followed him through winding streets and shadowed alleys until they reached a building that seemed to belong to another world. The walls were dark, polished wood and stone, lit only by the glow of lanterns. Inside, the air was warm, scented with leather and old books. It was quiet, yet alive with an unseen pulse of power. "This is yours?" Seraphine asked, looking around in awe. The place felt more like a fortress of knowledge than a home, with shelves lined with volumes that seemed older than time itself. "It belongs to many," Lucian said simply, "but it will be yours if you choose to step into the path your mother left behind." The words felt like a challenge, daring her to step beyond the ordinary, to embrace a life she had never imagined. Over the following days, Lucian became her guide. He was patient yet firm, testing her intelligence, her courage, her ability to see through deception. Each lesson was cloaked in the mundane, reading old texts, memorizing names and dates, but beneath the surface, every moment was a test of her resolve. "You must learn," he told her one evening as rain streaked the windows, "because the world you know is only a shadow of what is real. Those who watch, those who wait, they are not bound by the same rules as ordinary people." Seraphine tried to absorb his words, but questions swirled in her mind. What do they want with me? Why my mother? Why now?" Lucian's eyes darkened, and he looked away for a moment, as if carrying a burden too heavy to speak aloud. "Your mother was strong. She held back forces that even I could not control, and when she died, she left pieces of herself in you, pieces that must be protected." The weight of his words settled in her chest. She had always thought of herself as ordinary, quiet, careful, unnoticed. Yet now, the notion that her bloodline held power, that her mother had fought battles she never knew about, made her pulse race with both fear and awe. Days turned into nights, and Seraphine began to notice the subtle ways Lucian watched her, not with the coldness of a stranger, but with an intensity that suggested he measured every thought, every emotion. At first, she resented it, feeling trapped under his gaze. But slowly, a strange connection formed. Moments of vulnerability and shared silence became bridges between them, creating a tension neither fully understood. "You are different," Lucian said one night, standing close enough that she could see the depth in his eyes. You feel things others do not. You notice things even when you try not to. Seraphine looked down, unsure what to say. The truth was undeniable. She had always felt the world differently. Shadows and whispers spoke to her in ways she had dismissed as imagination, and now in his presence she wondered if her gift was awakening. Lucian's gaze softened, and for the first time he allowed a small smile. This is not a curse, Seraphine. Not yet. But it could become one if you are unprepared. The tension between them was palpable. Fear mingled with curiosity, awe mingled with something warmer, something neither wanted to name aloud. Yet the power imbalance was clear. He was the shadowed figure of legend, and she was a novice, untested and vulnerable. Still, she felt the stirrings of courage, a spark that refused to be crushed. One evening a messenger arrived, a figure cloaked in gray. They handed Lucian a folded note sealed with wax. He glanced at it, his expression unreadable, then looked at Seraphine with an intensity that made her stomach twist. "They know," he said simply. "They know about you, your mother, and the power that lies in your blood. And now they move." Fear gripped her chest. She had imagined danger, but the reality was sharper than any dream. "Who?" she asked, voice trembling. Lucian did not answer immediately. Instead, he took her hand, a gesture so sudden, so grounding, that her heart thudded violently in her chest. "People who do not care who they hurt to get what they want," he said finally, "and people who will test you. You must be ready, Seraphine, because the moment of choice is coming." The words hung in the air like mist, chilling and impossible to ignore. She understood then that her life had shifted irreversibly. The ordinary world had ended the moment she had stepped into the graveyard and found men in suits surrounding her mother's resting place. Days passed in preparation. Lucian trained her in ways that were subtle yet profound, lessons in observation, strategy, and patience. Every moment spent together was charged, electric, though unspoken. Their conversations, brief and loaded with subtext, created a tension that neither could fully explain. Seraphine began to feel herself changing, growing stronger, sharper, more aware of the currents of power flowing around her. One night, as the city slept under a blanket of fog, Seraphine found herself standing on a balcony, looking down at the river. Lucian joined her silently, and for a long moment they watched the reflection of the city lights ripple across the water. "You are ready for the next step," he said softly, standing just behind her. His presence was overwhelming, yet somehow comforting. Seraphine swallowed hard. "I think I am, but I'm also scared. Everything feels so enormous." Lucian's hand brushed against hers, not touching but close enough to make her shiver. Fear is natural. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward despite it. The night stretched around them, quiet except for the distant hum of life. And then, without warning, a shadow moved across the balcony. Seraphine froze, the black rose she carried tightening in her grasp. Lucian's eyes sharpened instantly. "Someone watches us," he said, his voice a low growl, "and they are no ordinary threat." Before she could react, the shadow darted back into the darkness, leaving a folded note on the balcony floor. Lucian picked it up, reading it quickly. His expression darkened, eyes narrowing. "They know where we are," he said. "They are coming. You must stay close to me, trust me completely." Seraphine's pulse raced. Fear, adrenaline, and a strange thrill mingled in her chest. The ordinary world was gone, replaced by one of power, danger, and secrets. And in the center of it all, standing like a figure both terrifying and magnetic, was Lucian. For the first time, she realized that her life was no longer her own. It belonged in part to the path her mother had left, and in part to this man who had become her guide, protector, and something more, though neither of them had named it. The night closed in around them, heavy with storm clouds and unseen eyes. And as the first drop of rain fell onto the balcony, Seraphine clutched the black rose to her chest and whispered to herself, I am ready, I think. But even as she said it, a sense of dread prickled her skin. The shadows outside were moving faster now, and the city itself seemed to hold its breath. Whatever was coming would test her in ways she could not yet imagine, and Lucian, the man of shadows and power, would be at her side through it all. And in that moment, Seraphine understood. Nothing in her life would ever be ordinary again. The forest at night was alive with whispers. Moonlight streamed through the gaps between the trees, casting silver patterns across the damp ground. Seraphine's breath came in shallow bursts as she moved carefully through the undergrowth, the black rose clutched tightly in her hand. Lucian was beside her, his presence a constant shadow, protective and overwhelming all at once. "You must stay alert," he said softly, his voice low and steady. "The forces that hunt you, they are patient and cunning. One misstep and they will strike." Seraphine nodded, though fear and determination battled within her. She had grown stronger since the night in the graveyard, since the lessons Lucian had taught her. But the knowledge that danger lurked constantly at the edges of her life was both thrilling and terrifying. Her mother's secrets seemed closer now, tangible and real, yet tangled with mysteries she could not yet understand. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a sound that made her stop in her tracks. A soft rustle, almost like a whisper, floated through the trees. Lucian's hand brushed hers instinctively, grounding her. "Focus," he said. "Not everything is what it seems." They moved forward, the silence between them deep and charged. In the days since they had begun this journey, Seraphine had felt a strange connection growing between them, an unspoken understanding that went beyond words. Each glance, each moment of shared tension, carried a weight neither fully acknowledged. And yet beneath the layers of fear and power, something tender and fragile had begun to bloom. Finally, they reached an old ruin, half swallowed by the forest. Moss covered the stones, and the air smelled of earth and time. Lucian paused, studying the place with a gaze that was both reverent and wary. "This is where your mother found the knowledge she hid from the world," he said, "and it is where you will understand what she protected." Seraphine stepped forward cautiously, her fingers tracing the carvings on the stone walls. Symbols etched long ago pulsed faintly in the moonlight, as if carrying whispers of a forgotten language. "What is this place?" she asked. "It is a sanctuary," Lucian replied. "A place where power can be controlled, where curses can be contained. But it is not safe. Dark forces are drawn to it, and they know you are here." Her heart quickened. She had suspected danger, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down her spine. "Then why bring me here?" she asked. "Because you are ready," Lucian said simply, "and because you must see the truth. The truth." The word echoed in her mind like a distant bell. She had spent her life chasing small certainties, clinging to the ordinary, and now the ordinary was gone. The truth she had been shielded from was raw, dangerous, and alive. Lucian led her to a central chamber, where a pool of still water reflected the moonlight. He knelt beside it, tracing a pattern with his fingers. "Your mother's power," he explained, "was inherited through generations. It is tied to your bloodline. That power can protect or it can destroy." Seraphine knelt beside him, her eyes wide. "Destroy? What do you mean?" Lucian's gaze met hers, dark and intense. "The curse that touches your family is old. It feeds on fear, on grief, on hesitation. If left unchecked, it can consume everything you love and everyone you love." A shiver ran through her. She had always felt different, had always sensed shadows and whispers no one else could, but now she understood that these feelings were more than imagination. They were the first stirrings of a power she had yet to fully grasp. "You will have to embrace it," Lucian continued. "To control it, you must accept it, and to accept it, you must trust me completely." Seraphine's mind spun. Trust. She had feared, resisted, and doubted, yet she could feel the gravity of his presence anchoring her. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean just slightly on the man who had become both guide and enigma. "Are you afraid of me?" she asked, her voice soft, almost vulnerable. Lucian's expression softened, a rare crack in the mask of the feared man she had come to know. "I am not afraid of you," he said, "but I am aware. You are strong, Seraphine, stronger than anyone realizes, including yourself." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The moonlight danced across their faces, and Seraphine felt a strange warmth, even amidst the tension. The connection between them was undeniable, built not from words, but from shared danger, trust, and an unspoken longing. Suddenly, the water in the pool shimmered unnaturally, ripples forming without wind. Seraphine gasped, and Lucian's hand went instinctively to hers. "It's the curse," he said quietly. "It senses the awakening." The air thickened. Shadows seemed to stir, and the room's temperature dropped sharply. A dark figure materialized on the far side of the chamber, a ghostly presence, swirling and almost human in form. Seraphine's grip on Lucian tightened, her pulse racing. "You see," he said, his voice steady but low, "it knows, and it will test you." The shadow moved closer, and Seraphine felt a strange pull in her chest. Fear mingled with a surge of energy that felt like her own, like a heartbeat echoing in the dark. She raised the black rose, and in that moment the petals seemed to glow faintly, as if responding to her will. Lucian's eyes met hers, sharp and intense. "Focus, Seraphine, control it. This is the first step." The shadow recoiled, then surged forward, testing her resolve. Seraphine closed her eyes briefly, letting her fear transform into determination. She felt the energy within her rise, flowing through her veins like liquid fire. When she opened her eyes, the shadow froze, almost as if recognizing her strength. Lucian stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are learning," he said. "You are more powerful than you know." The tension between them, already thick with unspoken feelings, became almost unbearable. Seraphine's breath caught as she realized how close he was, how his presence made her heart race, how every word and gesture carried a weight she could not ignore. She began, unsure how to voice the whirlwind of emotions inside her. But before she could continue, the shadow dissipated, leaving the room silent once more. Lucian exhaled, a rare moment of relief passing over his face. "The curse tests not just your power but your heart," he said. "It senses doubt, fear, hesitation. You must be strong in every part of yourself, mind, body, and spirit." Seraphine nodded, trying to steady her racing heart. She understood in a way that was both frightening and exhilarating that her life had changed forever. The ordinary world she had known was gone, replaced by shadows, power, and a destiny she had yet to fully embrace. As they left the ruin and returned to the safety of Lucian's stronghold, Seraphine felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her body was tired, but her mind was alive with possibilities. Every glance at Lucian carried unspoken meaning, and every touch, fleeting or lingering, sent shivers down her spine. That night, as they sat by the fire, Lucian finally spoke in a quieter, more personal tone. "There is more I must tell you," he said, "about your mother and about the choices you will face." Seraphine leaned closer, her curiosity and trust growing. "Tell me," she whispered. Lucian's gaze softened, revealing a depth of emotion he rarely allowed anyone to see. "Your mother she loved fiercely. She protected you and your power even at great cost, but she could not protect you from everything. Some forces, some people would see you broken or worse." Seraphine's hands trembled slightly as she held the black rose. "What do you mean?" He looked at her, his expression both tender and grave. "I mean that your path will be difficult, that the choices you make will not just affect you but everyone around you, and that you must be willing to face the darkness, inside yourself and in the world." For a long moment neither spoke. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night, and the shadows danced across their faces. Seraphine felt a strange, overwhelming mixture of fear, excitement, and something else, something that she could not yet name. I think I can do it," she said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. Lucian's eyes softened further and he nodded. I believe you can, and I will be by your side, but you must be ready for whatever comes. Outside the night was calm, but Seraphine knew it was only the calm before the storm. The curse, the shadowed forces, the unspoken threats, they were all moving closer. And in that darkness, she and Lucian were bound together by trust, by destiny, and by something deeper that neither fully understood. As she lay down that night, the black rose resting beside her, Seraphine realized that she was no longer just the girl who had stood by her mother's grave. She was someone else, someone powerful, determined, and ready to face the shadows that waited in the world beyond. And somewhere in the distance, she could feel the curse stirring, testing, watching. The next challenge was coming, and there would be no turning back. The storm broke suddenly, lightning slicing across the sky, rain lashing the stone walls of the ancient temple where Seraphine and Lucian had taken refuge. The forest surrounding them was alive with the roar of the wind and the crash of thunder, yet inside the temple the air was calm, almost sacred. Candles flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the walls, and the scent of wet earth mingled with incense, filling the chamber with a strange, almost magical energy. Seraphine pressed the black rose to her chest, her heart racing. The curse, which had been dormant for days, had begun to stir violently. Shadows twisted in the corners of the room, and the walls themselves seemed to hum with anticipation. Lucian stood beside her, silent and steady, his presence a grounding force amid the chaos. "You are ready," he said quietly, his voice carrying authority and reassurance. "But this will not be easy. The curse is strong and it knows your fear." Seraphine swallowed hard. Fear was still there, coiling in her chest like a living thing, but beneath it was determination, a courage that had been growing within her since the night she found men at her mother's grave. She nodded. "I am ready," she whispered, though the words felt fragile against the storm outside. Lucian's gaze softened and he reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. The touch sent a shiver through her, a warmth amidst the cold fear. "You are stronger than you know," he said, "and you will not face this alone." Together, they approached the center of the temple, where an ancient stone circle had been etched into the floor. Symbols glowed faintly in the candlelight, pulsing as if alive, and the air vibrated with energy. Lucian's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, grounding her, and she felt the bond between them deepen, a connection forged through fear, trust, and unspoken understanding. The shadows in the temple began to coalesce, forming shapes that were almost human. The curse had awakened, testing them both. Seraphine felt its pull, a tug at her very soul, and instinctively raised the black rose. Its petals glowed faintly, resonating with her power, and she realized that the curse responded to her strength and will. "Focus," Lucian instructed, his voice steady, unwavering. "Control it, do not let it control you." Seraphine closed her eyes, drawing in a deep, steadying breath. She let her fear flow into determination, her sorrow into strength, and her grief into resolve. The shadows writhed, testing her, but she held firm. The rose in her hand pulsed with light, and the shadows recoiled slightly, acknowledging her courage. Lucian's hand found hers, fingers intertwining, and she felt an electric surge at the contact. His presence was a shield and a guide, and in that moment, fear and desire, trust and longing, all merged into one overwhelming force. She realized that their connection was not just necessity, it was something deeper, something real, forged in the fire of shared danger and understanding. "You are doing well," Lucian said softly, leaning close. "Do not falter now. The curse tests everything, your strength, your heart, your will." The shadows surged again, stronger this time, forming shapes that were almost monstrous, their faces distorted, their eyes empty and hungry. Seraphine felt the pull, felt the weight of generations pressing down on her, but she did not waver. She lifted the black rose higher, and a beam of light shot from its petals, cutting through the darkness like a sword. The shadows shrieked, recoiling, and for a moment silence fell over the temple, broken only by the heavy breaths of the two of them. Lucian's eyes met hers, intense and unyielding. "You are ready," he said, voice low and steady. "You must now face the source." From the center of the circle, a darker shadow emerged, larger and more menacing than the rest. It pulsed with power, a living embodiment of the curse, and its presence made the air itself heavy. Seraphine felt her knees tremble, but she did not retreat. Lucian stood beside her, his hand firmly holding hers, his eyes never leaving hers. "You can do this," he said. "Remember everything we have learned. Remember your strength, your courage, and your love. That is your true power." The shadow advanced, its form twisting and writhing, but Seraphine stepped forward, the black rose glowing brighter with each heartbeat. She spoke softly, almost to herself, a whisper of intention and will. "I am not afraid. I am ready." The curse lunged, and the room erupted in light and shadow, twisting and spinning in a maelstrom of power. Seraphine felt herself lifted, pulled into the heart of the darkness, yet she did not panic. She focused on the rose, on Lucian, on the warmth and strength that had grown between them. She felt the energy of generations, the legacy of her mother, flowing through her, and with a cry that was both fear and determination, she struck at the heart of the shadow. Light and darkness collided, and for a moment everything went silent. Then, slowly, the shadow began to dissipate, unraveling into nothingness, leaving the temple bathed in the soft glow of candlelight and the moon above. Seraphine sank to her knees, exhausted but victorious, and Lucian knelt beside her, holding her close. "You did it," he said, voice full of awe and something softer, almost tender. "You faced it and conquered it." Tears blurred her vision, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and emotion she could not fully name. I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. Lucian's hands framed her face gently. "No," he said, his voice steady, low, and intimate. "You did this. I only guided you. All of this, your strength, your courage, your heart, this was yours all along." For a long moment they held each other, the storm outside fading into a gentle rain that tapped against the temple walls. The world beyond was still dangerous, still uncertain, but in this moment all that mattered was the bond they had forged, the trust, the love, the unspoken promise of protection and understanding. Seraphine looked up at Lucian, her eyes searching his, and she realized that the man who had once been feared, untouchable, and distant had become something entirely different in her eyes. He was not just a guide or protector. He was part of her world, part of her journey, part of the courage she had discovered within herself. You saved me," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. He shook his head slightly, a faint smile touching his lips. "No, Seraphine, you saved yourself. I only helped you see it." The words, simple and profound, resonated deep within her. She had been afraid, uncertain, and lost, but she had found her strength. And in the process, she had discovered something equally powerful, the depth of her own heart and the bond that had grown between them through darkness, struggle, and trust. Outside, the rain began to ease, the storm retreating as dawn approached. Light filtered through the trees, soft and golden, casting warmth across the temple floor. Seraphine and Lucian stood together, side by side, looking out at the world they had fought to reclaim. The curse had been conquered, but its lessons lingered: strength, courage, and the knowledge that darkness could be faced, overcome, and transformed. Seraphine knew that challenges would come again, that danger was never fully gone, but she felt ready. Stronger than she had ever been, bound not just by power, but by love, trust, and the knowledge that she and Lucian would face whatever came together. Lucian's hand found hers again, fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "The world is vast and shadows linger, but together we are stronger than anything that comes our way." Seraphine nodded, a smile breaking through her exhaustion. She had feared the darkness, feared the unknown, and feared the power within her. But now she embraced it, embracing herself, her legacy, and the man who had become her anchor. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the forest canopy, illuminating the temple in gold and silver, Seraphine felt a sense of peace she had never known. The journey had been long, filled with danger, fear, and uncertainty, but it had also revealed her heart, her courage, and her capacity for love. Lucian stood close, his presence a constant warmth, and she realized that the bond they shared was unbreakable, a connection forged through darkness, tested in fire and strengthened by trust and courage. "You are ready for the world," he said softly. "And I am ready to stand beside you always." Seraphine squeezed his hand, her heart full. "Then we face it together," she said, her voice steady and certain. "No matter what comes." The wind shifted, carrying away the remnants of the storm. Outside, the forest seemed to breathe again, alive with possibilities, with life, with the promise of a future forged not in fear, but in courage, love, and redemption. And in that golden morning light, Seraphine understood something profound. She was no longer the girl who had stood alone at her mother's grave. She was a survivor, a fighter, a keeper of power, and a heart that had learned to trust and love. Beside her, Lucian was more than a shadow or a legend. He was a part of her story, her journey, her strength. Together, they stepped into the new day, ready to face whatever shadows lingered, knowing that their bond, their courage, and their love would guide them through whatever came next. The world was vast, uncertain, and full of challenges, but for the first time, Seraphine felt truly alive. And somewhere in the quiet forest, the black rose rested in her hand, a symbol of her strength, her courage, and the love that had grown in the midst of darkness.